Welcome, welcome, dear listeners, to another episode of Music and Politics. Today we explore modernity. What does it mean to be modern? What are its disruptive energies? Specifically, our focus will be on perhaps that most distinctive feature of modern life, the emancipation of women, gender equality. We will listen to female composers, to modern composers obsessed with females, the fight for equality, and the opening of the modern mind. How the struggle of women gave rise to the theories that would become psychology and psychoanalysis itself. So we will listen to Stravinsky and Strauss and Weill and Smythe, a female composer overlooked, denied at opera houses around the world for over a century. And we'll close with the story of a female pirate, Pirate Jenny, from Brecht and Weill's Threepenny Opera. So please stay tuned for another episode of Music and Politics. And let's start right away with Ethel Smythe, with music of an activist, emboldened, written for the suffrage movement, specifically in England. Let's listen to Songs of Suffrage, number 3, The March of the Women. Shout, shout up with your song. And certainly, dear listeners, you can hear the resemblance to a militant, almost military-style march in this work. And indeed, Ethel Smythe, the composer herself, went to jail. She and other activists broke the windows of Parliament even, and it is said that in jail she conducted with her toothbrush her fellow jailed activists singing this march. Modernity, hysteria, psychoanalysis. What unites all of these elements? Well, of course, in a concrete sense, yes, this new breakthrough was political emancipation, recognizing the full subjectivity and subjecthood of women, citizens, participants in society itself. And in the years before, European observers like Baudelaire saw something developing of the fleeting, of the transient, of the breaking down of values, and the freeing of new primal energies. A quote from the Austrian writer Robert Musil from Vienna, considered a kind of cradle for this breakdown and these new energies. No one knew how to distinguish between what was above and what was below, what was moving forward and what was moving backward. Life was getting quicker. The increasing speed itself, the tempo, yes, if you think of communication, whether it's the telegraph and ultimately the radio, or of course train travel, the first subways and metro lines, yes, which sets off an age of nervousness, an ailment of living in the modern world, at times called neurasthenia, which we will explore. Let's go to another piece of music by Igor Stravinsky, yes, seen in many ways as a kind of explosive clarion call, if not even prophetic, of the coming breakdown and conflagration in the first total war, the mass death of World War I. Let's go to Stravinsky's Rite of Spring in 1913, just a few minutes into the beginning, and we will hear what actually he depicts musically within just the first few minutes. It's said that the first performance of this ballet incited a riot at the Palais Garnier in Paris, where it premiered, and you can understand the jagged edges of those syncopated rhythms, so strange, so unfamiliar, a kind of akin to a Picasso-like cubism in music, if you will. The title itself, The Rite of Spring, by Rite, it's R-I-T-E, in French, sacré, in other words, a sacred ritual of spring, and it combines those two elements, right? The kind of jagged combination of, on the one hand, a new awakening, a new dawn, a spring, and something atavistic, something deeply primal and primitive emerging here. And Stravinsky depicts just that. Yes, the proceedings of this work are of a ritual of spring. In particular, the music you just heard, right, dedicated, the augurs of spring, to the dances of the young girls, which will be immediately followed by a ritual of abduction. And in the concluding climax of the whole work, it is a sacrifice, yes? It is young women of the community, yes, being murdered on behalf of the entire community, yes, taking what is most sacred and delivering it up to the spirits of the gods. And the fact that Stravinsky chose this idea, this story, yes, and it occurs right at the time, of course, right before the First World War, and at the time where the very first European countries are providing for the emancipation, the equality of women, in particular around the time of the 1905 revolution, where the Grand Duchy of Finland, one of the first European countries, institutes political emancipation for women. So very much of a moment when the politics are changing at a rapid speed itself. And this disruptive potentiality, yes, it's a kind of proliferation of energies against what had been taken for granted before, yes? Sometimes it's known as a kind of politics of, on a new key, using a musical metaphor, unheard of politics itself at a time where there's a great deal of anxiety about these changes itself. And Freud's first patients, if we return to the origin of understanding that the human is not master in their own house, similarly to the way in which old structures and old oligarchies began to crumble in the new economy, the new energy, the new speed. Similarly, Freud's basic conception, if one were to essentially boil it down, would be that the human is not master in their own house. His postulation of an unconscious, yes, of a whole realm of activity, of energy, of thought that we are not aware of, but is certainly there and certainly strong, undermines the kind of self-possession of any idea or even ideal of the individual. His first patients that helped him establish, first of all, a method known as the talking cure. The talking cure, one of his famous patients, Anna O, was the name Freud gave in his first major text, 1896, Studies on Hysteria, written with an older colleague, Joseph Breuer. This patient, Anna O, used the metaphor of chimney sweeping, of getting at all that lies beneath in the unconscious. And she, like many of her generation, were stifled in the release of their talents. Yes, of course, it was an era of such advancement, economically and socially and technologically, and yet women were largely still confined to the domestic sphere. Yes, almost nowhere could they even sit and attend a lecture at the university level. Switzerland was one early exception, which is why women from all over Europe, especially from the eastern part, from the Russian Empire, came to Switzerland to study. Yes, and if you see the corollary of the idea of the hysteric, which of course was used as a means of coding this nervousness, gendering it as something distinctly female, distinctly threatening, we can see its corollary in the works of the time itself. And let us turn to another young rebel of the time, Strauss, Richard Strauss, who two of his scandal operas at the time, you can hear them, they're operas of psychoanalysis, they're also operas of understanding hysteria, both about two iconic women in history, one Salome, yes, the Herodian princess, and the other Electra, a Greek princess. Let us have a listen. You will hear in these two intensely energetic short operas by Strauss, Salome and Electra, a lot of the energy of Stravinsky. Yes, another young firebrand, a young rebel in the world of music, right? To the point that Rite of Spring incited a riot. Salome was banned. And famously, the New York Metropolitan Opera, the daughter of J.P. Morgan herself, did not want these operas brought to New York, perhaps too close for comfort, too familiar, yes? Right, the daughter of, in both cases, royal families stifled, yes, suppressed, to some extent enchained. And, of course, the outburst and the acting out, right, triggers to shocking, if not traumatic turn of events. Of course, with Salome, it's the beheading of John the Baptist, right, the great prophet of Jesus coming at the very start of Christianity. And Salome, yes, the daughter of King Herod, yes, who tempts the king, seduces him, right, into this execution, making her mother, she's actually a stepdaughter, yes, making her mother, the newly married wife of the king, quite jealous and inflamed. Let's have a brief listen to her famous dance, the Dance of the Seven Veils, which was the dance of seduction. The stepdaughter performs for the king in exchange for her wishes to be fulfilled, which in this case is the execution of the imprisoned John the Baptist. Not only a significant prophet in Christianity, but there are also Mandeans, whole religions devoted to John the Baptist as the true and ultimate final prophet. Let's have a listen to Strauss's Salome, Dance of the Seven Veils. You can hear the dance erupts into a kind of whirling frenzy, almost, right, illustrating the concept here of kind of hysterical outburst, outpouring, and suggestions even at the end, not just of certainly Oedipal complications, but even of necrophilia, as Salome, right, erotically embraces the decapitated head of John the Baptist in most depictions, as well as, right, varying degrees of undress during the dance itself. And Strauss gesturing, of course, to the kind of exotic, if not Orientalist atmosphere here, right, of the Herodian kingdom, the site of which their castle, where it's believed this dance and this execution may have taken place, recently apparently located by archaeologists, actually, in the kingdom of Jordan. Moving from the Jordan and the Herodian dynasty, which actually was Idumean. Yes, they were converts. They were from a neighboring territory of ancient Judea that had been amalgamated during the Maccabean Hasmonean dynasty, and then were the last kings of Judea, moving from Judea and Jordan over to Mycenae, to the earliest origins of the Greek language, the inspiration for Homer, right, the hero of the Trojan War, Agamemnon, and his daughter Electra, from whence comes, of course, Jung's postulation of an Electra complex, which Freud never explicitly adopted, and yet clearly it is a logical deduction from his system here, and Strauss devotes another scandal opera to Electra. Electra being the daughter of Agamemnon, yes, and Electra, finding her father dead, conspires with her brother to kill her mother, Clytemnestra. And throughout the opera, she's haunted, really traumatized by this murder of her father, which she can't get out of her head. So not only is it a really strong, effective depiction of this early concept of hysteria, but also trauma itself and working through of trauma here. So let's have a listen to some of Electra. This is where she cries out, "Alone I am all alone." Right, the icy coldness of abandonment illustrated here through Electra, and then, of course, her revenge fantasies that she is gripped by, is really unable to resist. It's that case of this overwhelmingly strong urge and impulses that cannot be resisted here if we go towards the end of Electra. Like Rite of Spring, like Salome, Electra climaxes in a dance. Let's have a listen towards the end here, the finale, and you'll hear Electra exclaim, "Love kills." And at the end she says, "Be silent and dance, be silent and dance." And it's usually depicted as a kind of suicidal dance into madness at the end. So again, the theme of an overcome primal energy that culminates in a sacrifice that somehow at this origin point in the deep past, right, if you like, the two pillars of the Western Europe, right, Athens and Jerusalem, the Hebrew and the Greek, find their point in these two young women, right, stifled, tortured, right, embattled. And Strauss turns to them just at the moment that perhaps the defining marker of modernity, of it's clearly long overdue. Women cannot be confined to the domestic sphere anymore, and in fact their talents are overcoming and morphing into forms that cannot be held back, cannot be controlled any longer there. As the British suffragette Emile Pankhurst, Why We Are Militant, put it, yes, said, the time is long past when it became necessary for women to revolt. The time is long past, she wrote, yes? And this point, right, she says again, our hearts burn within us when we read and celebrate liberty, yes? And then we wake to the knowledge that these things are not for us. They are only for our brothers. Then there comes a sense of bitterness into the hearts of some women, and they say to themselves, will men never understand? Well, let us conclude by moving ahead a couple of decades to the Weimar Republic, to the famous three-penny opera of Brecht and Weil. And this is, if you like, a second phase of modernity. It's no longer about riots in the concert hall, but it's rather about a mashup, a fusion of the cabaret with jazz. And that, as well as revolution and Bolshevism and Leninism and Brecht and Weil, perhaps the definitive text that speaks to that is to create a three-penny opera, right? An opera for the people, an opera for the poor, based on an Old English text of the Beggar's Opera. And one of the main characters is Pirate Jenny. Pirate Jenny. And let us think of this line from Pankhurst. There comes a sense of bitterness into the hearts of some women, and they say to themselves, will men never understand? Let's listen to Lotte Lenya singing Pirate Jenny from Brecht and Weil's Three-Penny Opera. So Jenny is a worker, a proletarian, making the bed, cleaning the dishes all day, and then she says, one day they'll see me smiling at those glasses, and ships with cannons will come into the harbor. So it's really a fantasy of destruction, that one day justice will come, will overturn, right, the cruel, unfair system she must live within, right, as a kind of awakening for her and for all those who overlook there. So you hear the femme fatale, right, the danger of the erotic alternative. That's also a breakdown. It threatens psychosis, breaking all kinds of taboos here, right? Even that regressive to the primitive that Freud suggested all humans share in their infantile stage of the polymorphous perverse, when eros is all present everywhere. and combined with, of course, the dangers of not only the repression of the so-called highborn women, right, being obstructed and blocked and restricted to the domestic sphere, but also the rising of the poor masses, yes, that crime, and indeed, the Threepenny Opera is essentially about capitalism of the criminal underclass, of beggar gangs here, trained and run as well-oiled as any capitalist corporation, kind of undermining any distinction between the criminal and the capital. On that note, a great thanks to all of you, dear listeners. Thank you for, again, your time. And please remember to rate and review, and to like and to subscribe. Music and Politics. Yes. Dis of Dissent. Sounds of Subversion. Please send any questions to musicandpoliticspod@gmail.com, and do seek us out on Patreon at Music and Politics Pod. That's one word, Music and Politics Pod, where you can find membership that opens the door to curated reading and listening lists, as well as meetings and consultations with our team. Fare thee all so well.